On today's podcast, we sit down with advertising music executive Josh Rabinowitz. Josh is really one of the brightest, most incisive people about this particular topic. He has been in the advertising field for a very, very long time. He really knows his work. We talked a lot about where the business is at today, the unsustainability of the major agency view toward, music and so forth, the evolution of how it's all, evolving over time. We also looked at, what's the process of placing music into commercials. It's slightly different than, very different than in films or in television. The amount of players that are involved, who's involved in those choices, and what are the best ways to get your music into commercials? How do you do that? So you're not going to want to miss this. Insiders, are you ready? Welcome to MUBUTV's Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage artists and music business professionals who are dedicated to having a successful career in the new music industry. Here are your hosts, Rich Ezra and Eric Knight. Welcome back, Insiders, to another episode of the MUBUTV Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage your music career. On today's episode, we sat down with veteran advertising music executive Josh Rabinowitz to discuss the changing role music plays in advertising in today's fractured media landscape. We discussed the changing attitudes of artists regarding music in commercials, who are the decision makers for a piece of music in advertising, what you need to know if you're interested in this area of the business, and much, much more. You won't want to miss it. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Hey, Insiders. Are you looking to take your music career to the next level? Then you need to know about the Music Business Registry. The Music Business Registry is the leading music industry publisher of the most up-to-date contact information for major and independent record label A&R, music publishers, artist managers, music attorneys, music supervisors, and much, much more. The Music Business Registry is the trusted industry standard and source serving the music business community for over 28 years with the most accurate and up-to-date contact information available. Their titles include the A&R Registry, the Film and Television Music Monthly, the Music Publisher Registry, and the Music Attorney Registry. All of their publications are available in print, PDF, CSV, or online subscription. Visit them now at musicregistry.com and receive a 10% discount by using coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout. That's musicregistry.com, coupon code MUBUTV10. When you're ready to put your music to work, musicregistry.com.
Welcome back, Insiders. Today's featured interview is with Josh Rabinowitz. Josh has a company called The Brooklyn Experience, and Josh's field is going to be very interesting to a lot of you who are looking to get music specifically into commercials. That's been a big area for Josh's entire career. He's worked at some of the largest advertising agencies, as you'll hear, and he discusses with us, how music is chosen for a spot, who the decision makers are for music in commercials, the role that budget plays in music selection, and a lot of other interesting kinds of information on how that world works. It's very specific. But one of the most interesting things that I thought he talked about was what his biggest mistakes have taught him professionally. So I think you're in for a real treat.
Yeah, I thought some of the really interesting points was how music is used more today to drive the storytelling and advertising more than ever, and talking about the attention economy and the points behind that, and also the decision makers that give the green light on a project and how many people and how many different things that this bounces back and forth until it's finally green-lit and ready for a broadcast.
Oh, absolutely. That part was the most fascinating because, you think in a record, it's the artist, it's the producer, but in commercials, my God, there's so many decision makers in how those choices are made, and it's going to be very interesting. So
absolutely.
Enjoy.
You're in for a treat. Insiders, sit back, relax, and enjoy our featured interview with Josh Rabinowitz.
Josh, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
I want to start with you regarding your exit from Gray. You were there for many, many years, and in February, you wrote in Shoot Magazine that and I quote, the big agency model is deeply challenged. And then you wrote that it may be too big to succeed in this era. It seems that in the present advertising, marketing, and music climate, the consultancy and or the boutique is probably the way to go. And I guess my point is, hearing that from someone with your extensive background, to me, it says a lot. And I'm wondering if you can give us a sense of what you specifically meant. What are you seeing in this space right now?
I think clients that are hiring big agencies are finding that challenge to be quite apparent. If you hire a big ad agency, there's lots of amazing people there, obviously, but there's lots of people, there's lots of services. So if you're engaging an agency of record that's really big and you just want like very specific things done, you have very specific needs, you still have to pay for the other services. So, what I've been finding and seeing and hearing from lots of other people is that they are able to engage direct with brands at a smaller level with much more success. And I've seen it happening. And working at a big agency for Gray for 14 years and then Y&R before that for 7.5 years. So it's over 20 years. I've really seen this shift happening. And I felt like it was time for me to make a move.
Interesting. Tell us a little bit about Brooklyn Music Experience. From what I understand, Brooklyn Music Experience looks to advise clients on matters of overall music strategy. How do I penetrate a specific market or demographic? Execution. How do I get my music for my initiative legally and at a reasonable price? Curation. How should my brand sound and what music styles or composers should we use? Ideation, what should I use musically for my piece of content to make it great, effective, and even artful? And then finally, supervision. Can you suggest, find, procure, negotiate, and get a fair price for us, as well as a custom music parties for who simply want a track made for them? Can you break those down individually, each one of those areas?
Sure. I mean, overall, what I like to do with this business and what I am doing with this business is offering insight, access, and expertise. So the access part, I think, is very important to so many people. If you're starting up a company, if you're a brand that's looking for a very reasonable yet creative partner or collaborator, if you're a company that is based out of Europe and you're trying to get traction in the United States, you're based out of Asia trying to get traction in North America, I can offer that access because of being such a big connector, being kind of a high profile player in the space that I've been in for years. I'm able to offer that type of access. So that covers a lot of different types of businesses. For instance, if you're an artificial intelligence company, music company, and you want to get traction in the branded space, I can offer that access. The insight aspect to it is there are a lot of companies that are being bought and sold. And sometimes the way companies kind of present themselves to investors, to venture capitalists, isn't always exactly what they are, It's all about the pitch and the way you present yourself. And just being someone who's been in the space where I work with so many different aspects of the music industry, I could give people insight that are on either side of that buy and sell coin. The expertise part, if it's music supervision, if it's creating a custom track, this is something that I could do in my sleep because I've been doing it for so many years. If I'm working with a brand on a very high profile music execution or initiative, I'm a pretty good go-to person for that, and I can offer them insight on how to do it, the expertise on how to do it at a reasonable price, who are the best people to work with. It's interesting. There are so many companies that kind of just go blindly into kind of the branded music space, and they just hire someone that gives them a great pitch, but it's not always the best person to work with. And I feel like from my experience, and all the things that I've done, and I've been in the trenches on so many different types of executions, that, I could be an excellent consultant, advisor, and partner collaborator on a lot of these different types of things.
It's interesting listening to you speak about this because, I guess I want to sort of shift gears here and get into like the actual creative aspect of what you do. But one of the things I want to start with Josh is that in terms of observing your particular business, that one of the most significant sea changes since you started in the advertising area has been the attitude of artists and bands and so forth of having their music used in advertisements and commercials. And I'm curious, from your point of view, beyond simple economic factors, what do you think contributed to this shift over the last 2 decades?
Definitely the economic factor was big. And obviously, at the turn of the century, which is now almost 20 years ago. So it's okay to say turn of the century. There was that major shift with people downloading free music. So what was a great way to monetize your music? It was obviously a shifting paradigm. It continues to shift. So from a monetization perspective, getting paid some really decent money upfront for a use of your music in some type of media use was an excellent monetizer. But I think things have shifted because brands have become a lot more relevant in culture. Obviously, a brand like Apple is a lifestyle brand. It's almost like semi-religious to many people. It's just such an important daily part of their existence. I have an Apple laptop on my lap right now and an Apple iPhone on my knee. And, I need to know where my Apple iPhone is all the time, and I need to have the latest apps and all that. So that's obviously one of the greatest brands in the world, but certainly other brands are really, really important in the daily existence of people. And I don't think they think of it as a shill anymore. They don't think of it as a sellout, more of like sell in and don't be left behind. And that's something that I've been talking about for years and many other people have also been talking about. But I feel like now it's part of people's DNA. If you're a young band, if you're a young artist, if you're a young composer, you're going to the Berklee School of Music, you're going to some other great music school out on the West Coast, in the Midwest or in the South, you look towards monetizing your music in a rational, pragmatic way. It's very difficult. I was a trombone player for many years. It was very difficult for me to make enough money playing the trombone, being a band leader, being a side musician. If you're being pragmatic about your musical passion, I think it's a great way to connect to consumers, to get your music discovered if you align yourself with a great brand.
So it's more of a cultural shift of relevancy that has occurred over these last 2 decades.
Yeah, I definitely think that's the best way of putting it. And it's also the technological kind of shift, the instantaneousness of getting music, kind of an appreciation of digital and mobile technology. And also the major labels and indie labels and major publishers and indie publishers have aligned themselves with brands in a very meaningful way. They've also aligned themselves with other types of media and mediums in a meaningful way. Podcasts is one of the big buzzwords now, and everyone seems to have a podcast executive on their staff. Technology is and the media are really important aspects of the music business. That's obvious. But the media is really, if you think of what's going on in television, it's the golden age of television. I prefer to watch television at home on my big screen TV than go to a theater and drop like $20 and have to wait online and deal with all the stress, because it's so much more artful. So I feel like people see these examples of artful executions and they're like, this is cool. This is something that I feel comfortable getting involved with. And then it starts to become more of like a pragmatic pursuit because of the comfort.
Yeah, Josh, and I'm really curious with this next question. Is music used more today to drive stories and advertising than in the past?
It's interesting because in the past with advertising, as we all know, the jingle was king. And that was actually an excellent way of communicating a brand message and kind of tattooing that brand message in your brain. Music is the best branding tool. It stays with you longer than any other kind of sensory input. It's become a different, more sophisticated way now and more culturally relevant because like filmmakers like Scorsese and Mike Nichols and a whole bunch of other people in the late 60s and early 70s, when they started to tap into the main vein of relevant music, relevant cultural music, advertisers have done that, and it's become a lot more sophisticated and a lot hipper than in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And you have great people. You have like a plethora of great people involved in kind of the sync and brand music delivery world. And it's amazing. When I first got into it back in the mid 90s, there was hardly anybody that people were paying attention to in my space. Once in a while, people would talk about a music producer that produced a great jingle that then was converted into like a single. But that was a rarity, and it wasn't kind of discussed at a more high profile level. Now it is, and there are so many conferences, and there are so many programs in schools, which I love. I love to teach, and I've been teaching for years as an adjunct professor, the class called Music in the Media, and there are a lot of classes like that at universities, and there are a lot of music industry programs at universities where music supervisors are kind of part of the conversation.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing you say this, because just some of the two directors that you mentioned, Scorsese and Nichols, you're actually seeing it in commercials now. Like the directors have almost influenced either the supervisors or the people that are in the ads, because you're hearing even some of the music that have been placed in some of these iconic films like Goodfellas and different things like that. You're actually hearing them on ads now, and you're wondering, wow, is that an influence from that? So it's just interesting hearing that.
I love it. I think some of the music used in Goodfellas is some of the best music ever played. Certainly a lot of the Quentin Tarantino stuff over the years. Mike Nichols very early on in The Graduate, and then other things that he's done over the years. Yeah, I mean, it exploded when these auteurs in film really were making an impact in culture, and then it kind of dissipated until some of the indie directors came into play, like a Jim Jarmusch. And Jarmusch, he's done amazing things, and he continues to, and a lot of directors followed suit. But now with television, it's just, the music is so amazing. There's so much great music that nobody's heard. The composers are doing amazing things. I don't know if you've been watching the show Chernobyl on HBO.
But I've heard
I'm about to get I don't get HBO anymore, but a friend of mine is sending me the DVDs from it, and that takes place in '86.
Yeah, 86. Yeah, late 80s. But just think, when you look at it and listen to it, the sound design and the soundscapes, they're very sophisticated. There used to be just like a handful of people that could execute things at a high level. Now there's just so many people, and to me, it's just an awesome experience. Even Game of Thrones in the final season, the sound design that they did and the mixing, it's of the highest quality. There's so many great people out there that are executing at such a high level that it's really exciting.
Yeah, it's very, very exciting. And, I want to ask you, Josh, it's been said that we live, and I'm sure you've heard this, in an attention economy when it comes to marketing in media. And I'm curious, from your point of view, has this reinvented the way that music is used in media? And if so, how?
I mean, the concept of attention economy is something that I'm not totally clear on. I know a bit about it because I've heard it discussed. I mean, could you go a little deeper into at least your perception of it?
Well, just that, if the way I look at it, my perception is that if you look at your own life, you, Josh Rabinowitz, look at your own life from the moment your eyes open in the morning until they shut at night, how many times is, a wife, a girlfriend, a mother, a brother, a sister, a boss, a friend, a text message, an email, a website, a TV program, a blog, something somewhere trying to get your attention to do something, and how many things can you actually fulfill upon, and then for how long? And then you begin to see, within that realm, that's the world that we live in today. So within the realm of attention, how many things can you give your attention to and for how long? And you begin to see how difficult it is, I think, to get you to, check out that new movie, watch that new, HBO series or that new Netflix series or that, whatever. We have so much coming at us all the time in so many areas that it's hard to get us to hone in and focus on one particular thing. I guess the point is that we don't live in a culture anymore that has so-called, water cooler talk because, your coworkers watched 17 different things last night, 15 of which you've never heard of or watch.
Exactly. Yeah, I've discussed it with some of my classes, and, we talk about how difficult a lot of these students are media students, how difficult it is to pay attention to anything for a long period of time. And I know for me, I was very accustomed to listening to full albums rather than, I listened to 45s when I was younger and I adored them. But the concept of listening to a full album now, nobody does it. Hardly anyone does it. And I think that's really affected people in this attention economy. And also, the concept of curation. There's too many curators out there. It's really hard to find someone that's a totally reliable curator at any moment. And sometimes these people on blogs or people that are on television or that just consistently post and influence culture, uh, they're trying to be outrageous at times just to get more and more attention. And so many things will slip through the cracks. But because of the unlimited, it's almost like there's an infinitude, unlimited amount of music that's out there. It's really hard to kind of appreciate it. Certainly when I grew up, I know when you grew up, there were very limited amount of tastemakers and gatekeepers. Now it feels like there's too many gatekeepers, but in a way that gives the power to the people. Chuck D said that when the internet really started to kick in and music was integrated into the internet, and especially with streaming and free downloads of music, the power went to the people. And in the beginning, there were very limited amount of success stories, and now there are many, many more. But it's not like every story is a success story. There are still like for every 2 or 3 musical success stories that have kind of been birthed, if you will, out of the internet kind of economy, there are still billions that haven't been. And I'm fascinated by all of it. I'm annoyed by it too because I like to kind of have a perception of what's out there that's good. I used to really rely on radio. It was sad that WPLJ in New York just went off the air. It hadn't been the same format for years, but I relied on that radio station in my teens and early and late teens as kind of a curator of culture. I listen to some satellite radio now once in a while, and they play some good things. And there are obviously all these podcasts now that are excellent curatorial things that are affecting culture in meaningful ways. There's just too much. So what I try to do professionally is just do the best work that I can and be professional and try to use my curatorial skills and my instincts and my experience. But am I going to make the greatest thing ever each and every time? Probably not, because I have so many collaborators with me and everyone else is trying to kind of get their little spice in the soup. And sometimes it affects it. It makes the soup too spicy, or it's not spicy enough, or too salty, if you know what I mean. So it's a real challenge to make something that really permeates culture in a super meaningful way. And a lot of these influencers are permeating culture and they're influencing the consumption of music. Certainly, some of the great television programs now are permeating culture and they're influencing how people listen to music to an extent. I think in the attention economy, as things shift, I believe the podcast and then kind of some aspect of the podcast is going to become that thing for a while that's influencing how people think about music and culture.
Yeah, that's a great segue into our next question, Josh. So if you can indulge our audience and really quickly take us through the journey, once you have your client on board, could you take us through the actual process and autonomy, creativity, and business-wise from inception to completion of the spot? And at what stage does music become a prime factor in the process?
Well, if we're talking about advertising and branding, I would say 85 to 90% of the time, music is not part of the ideation. It's more of and kind of a last minute 11th hour addition.
Really interesting. I thought that would play like a very vital role from the onset.
It should, and it does at times. And certainly, in my humble opinion, the best work that's done that wins awards at these major global advertising festivals, including the Cannes Lions Festival of Creativity and the Clios, the AICP. If music is part of that ideation, and that's when I get most excited, it's going to do well because when the music drives it, it automatically resonates. It might not resonate incredibly well, but it's going to resonate because the music is the primary thing. And just as an aside, the reason why I kind of left the world of advertising and the big agency side is that I want music to be first. It's not music first in advertising generally. It's music second, third, fourth, or fifth. And when I say that, like fourth or fifth is this 11th hour kind of pursuit of music, generally when a budget has dwindled. But in an ideal scenario, in the stuff that I've been involved with, where we're winning awards at a global level, music is part of the ideation. It helps drive the concept. It helps drive the creative, or it's married to the creative. So when the music's in there, it gets into everyone's kind of DNA, quote unquote, and it kind of makes the magic happen. And it's a beautiful thing when it's done right. And when you have great collaborators that are allowing the experts, certainly the music experts that are part of the collaboration, to utilize them for their expertise. Everyone is an expert in music because it's such an important part of people's lives. I find that when people defer to the music expert and really ask them to contribute rather than ask them to kind of just do what they're asking, you know what I mean? They're kind of like feeding them and saying, here's the music we want and this is what you should use, rather than kind of tap into this expert tastemaker skill set. It kind of blurs it a little bit. So that's just another aside. I think if you're tapping into the expertise of your collaborator, it's going to make the collaboration much, much better. So again, if the music's part of the ideation, you kind of know the boundaries of what the music's going to be when you're finishing and you're going into your post-production. So you're going to know what your budget is, and the music is there already. And then if you need to tweak it, you might have to go into an overage. But what's happening more and more, and this is the biggest disappointment for me of all, is that it's been polarized with music budgets. So there used to be like kind of a middle ground, and that middle ground was for custom music, original music, around, let's say, like the $15,000 to $35,000 range for hiring someone that's expert in composing, producing, and mixing music. It's gone to a polarization where it's either very high ticket items, music that's licensed at a very high price, or very low price, where generally people are offering $500, $1,000, $1,250, $250. And it's become this extreme. So when you do things in the 11th hour, bringing it all back to the original question, it's generally going to be low budget because there's not enough money and music hasn't been part of the ideation.
And I think that's a tragedy, because when you look at the iconic commercials that have resonated, there's been a strong connection, if not the entire music piece is driving that commercial, of course, besides the other content that's going on. So to me, as a consumer looking at that at a 50,000 foot level, I remember brands based on the song sometimes even. So I'm wondering, wouldn't that be worth the extra expense in investing in a higher, price song versus one that's going to be kind of like a lower level type of thing? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do. And yeah, it's kind of people that have grown up digital are accustomed to getting music for free. Right? They might claim that they're really passionate about paying for music and they're fans of music. They don't necessarily pay for the digital file as much, but they will spend money on concerts, or because they're a fan, maybe merch or something like that. But I think what's happened in culture is that people assume you can get music for close to free. I think they understand that something that's a high ticket item, like a very important band in culture, artist in culture, or a really famous song from like Led Zeppelin or the Rolling Stones or the Beatles or, Madonna or the like, Justin Timberlake, whatever, it's going to cost you a lot of money. I think they've lost track of that middle ground, where you're kind of collaborating with people that are being original and creative, with a capital C. It's sad. And I think that kind of people growing up digital, that's affected their perception.
Yeah, very much so. It's, listening to you, it makes me wonder, who are the decision makers then that give the final green light, from your choice of composer to your song choices to be used? I mean, who are the people that are involved in that? Is it strictly the product people who run the company? Is it the ad agency? Is it you? Who are those decision makers?
Generally speaking, the final call is from the person who's paying the bills. So that's going to be the brand. If the brand is visionary enough, and you could probably, like instinctually who these brands are that are visionary enough, they're going to rely on their agency of record or their collaborator, if it's a boutique or a consultant, to come up with this great work because they're making great decisions and they have the vision to understand that what's being offered to them is great. So you take a brand like Apple, you take a brand like Nike, you take a brand like Volkswagen, you take a brand like Volvo, the NFL, for instance. They do really high level work. They have an expectation from their collaborators to do high level work. And they are really great at understanding and being visionary about what work is good and what work is bad. So they're the ones that make the final decision. I would say they're in the advertising space. So when they are coming up with the preferred things to play for the client, generally speaking, it comes from the top at a great ad agency. For years and years at Gray, we were a great ad agency because our leadership was focused, great at making decisions, and visionary. And everything kind of funneled up like a pyramid to the top. And then the ultimate creative leader would make the decision. I think people are scared if they're not successful that they're going to make a mistake and offend a brand because of this climate. And they're scared that someone's going to say, oh, well, we don't like this. In fact, we don't really want to work with you guys. We have like this small creative boutique that we can work with for much less money. So people are scared to take the risks. And that's affected the creativity and that's affected the decision making. It's a long-winded answer to your question, but I think it reveals a lot of stuff.
Hey, Insiders, we hope that you're enjoying our featured interview. Before we dive back in, a word from our sponsor. So, hey, Rich, tell me a little bit about the Music Business Registry.
Well, what we are, Music Business Registry is the leading contact directory. We publish all of the most current, accurate, and up-to-date contact information for the music industry. We do directories for A&R. We do directories for music publishers. We do directories for film and television music. We do directories of artist managers, and we do directories of music attorneys. And we also sell other publications too, like the Indie Bible Series, the YouTube Bible Series, the Indie Spotify Bible Series, and other things as well. That's what we're about.
So if I wanted to find out, let's say, the music supervisor for American Horror Story, I can kind of go into the Film and TV monthly and find the information that I need there?
Well, we don't list specific shows. What we do list is if you know who the music supervisor is, and you can find that out on IMDb, then you can find their contact information. And we have that in our Film and Television Music Monthly. Absolutely, yes.
That's great. And I hear that we have a discount right now. If you go to musicregistry.com and use coupon code MUBUTV10 at checkout, you'll receive 10% off your first order.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah, we offer that to all of the MUBUTV insiders.
So insiders, check out musicregistry.com and use MUBUTV10 as your coupon code. Has the proliferation of so much access, this probably goes back to an earlier question, of so much access to music today affected the rates that you have to pay for the licensing of songs for commercials?
Yeah, I mean, if you work at a publisher or a major label, you're in a good position these days because people are willing to spend money for that high ticket stuff. And, it used to be a lot lower. I'm finding now that even for songs that are kind of semi-important in culture or semi-well-known, the publishers and the people that represent these copyrights and the major labels and the indie labels and the people that represent these masters, they know that people are willing to pay at a decent price point for them. So that high-level stuff, you're in a good position if you're on that side of the coin. But on the low-level stuff and the middle-level stuff, those budgets are just crunched. It's become really hard if you're an original music house that's creating original music. It's a very tough business to be in.
Well, then let me ask you then. Well, then what role does budget play in your musical choices? I mean, do you have a budget for music when you get involved in a project? Does somebody say, we're looking to you to give us ideas, or we really only have, $35,000 to spend on the budget for music, or how does that work?
Generally speaking, I would say 75% of the time, people come to us and say, look, this is what we've earmarked for music. And we'll fight them on it because there's too many open questions. We're not sure what direction we want to go. Does it have to be something that's scored? Does there have to be like a structure and an architecture to the track and a build? You can't necessarily find a piece of music that exists that you just could plop onto something and edit to make it work. People do that more and more, but it doesn't make sense all the time to do that. But sadly, about 75% of the time, people are like, yeah, we have this big shoot and we just don't have enough money to kind of go that way. So we really hope you can make it work. And that's become the challenge. The interesting thing that's always made me laugh, and not smile, but just laugh, is that there'll be a really low budget and the music process is not going great in some instance. And we're suggesting tracks and creative people and production people are coming up with tracks and clients have a vision. It's not clicking. Then all of a sudden, a track is suggested or put up against a cut. That's a very expensive track. And then the client's like, yeah, we're cool with that. And we're like, well, that's going to cost you a lot more than $3,500. You might want to add a couple of zeros onto that. And then they're like, okay, well, that's cool. We'll find the money. So, it's a way, the kind of way of making it work. And this is what I've worked on with my team for years when I was at Gray. And a lot of my team now has graduated out of my team and are leading agencies and music companies kind of as executive producers or heads of music, is that to get really involved with the client as best you can to develop that trust so they are going to rely on you for your expertise. And I think that's the hardest thing to do because the clients aren't around for like 5 years. They might be around for 2 or 3 years. You might win a new piece of business, then lose it. The chief marketing officer and their team might be there for a year, and then all of a sudden they're gone and they're working for someone else. So to gain that trust where people are going to be able to rely on you and trust you with budget and creative input and gatekeeping and curation, etc., it's a very hard thing to do. And that's one of the reasons that I kind of have stepped out of the big agency, because early in my career, I had gained the trust of so many different clients because the client stuck around for like 5 to 10 years. Now it shifts. It's almost like entropy and anarchy.
Yeah, they come and they go. They come and they go very, very quickly.
Yeah.
As more and more brands create content specifically for online websites and social media, does this give you any additional creative freedom in your music choices in that time isn't as significant a factor as it would be with TV or radio, or is it the same?
That's an interesting question because I don't think it's necessarily the same. And I think it does give us a greater opportunity to come up with great ideas. The problem is generally broadcast advertising, cinema advertising, radio advertising for big markets. The budgets were always kind of decent and they're shrinking like we talked about. But when you get into these other social media uses and internet uses, digital uses, web uses, whatever you want to call them, the budgets are minuscule. So you could be really creative and you could actually get people to create music for you because they know that the budgets are minuscule and they'll step up, but it's just not a lot of money. So on a rare occasion, there'll be a really nice budget for an execution in the social media space, but it's a rarity.
Interesting. Okay, because I always wondered. I mean, I remember a couple pieces that BMW did for exclusively for online. A couple pieces that other people have utilized for the online. And more interestingly, I mean, I know when we talk the Super Bowl, people used to watch the Super Bowl a lot of times to see those commercials. Now you watch them, I think it's 7 to 10 days before the Super Bowl airs, and you're watching them on YouTube. So that's interesting to hear you say that, Josh, because if they're not so I always thought that brands in terms of this competing space would be wanting to do more online branding, more online advertising, because it would seem like that would be a perhaps less expensive way, but to just not give any kind of money or time or consideration from a marketing angle, budget-wise, to that's very interesting to hear.
Well, the particular executions that you're talking about for the Super Bowl, that is a major budget, and because it appears online, right? It's for broadcast. So broadcast and online, it's always online for a year, all media for a year. So that's kind of coming out of a broadcast primary budget. Stuff that there are executions from major brands like BMW and Volkswagen where they're doing something that's only online, and they're doing it kind of with high production value. There are a few things like that, but most of the things that are done are not like that.
Okay. All right. I want to shift gears here for a second. When you come across a new composer whose work you creatively really like, is it ever a problem to try to sell a quote unquote unknown entity to a client in terms of working with them creatively?
Yeah, I've had challenges with that over the years. Some clients are really set in their ways, and they're very comfortable with the collaborators that they've used. So when that's the case, if there's been success, I and my team would become more of just like an executor, not really like a collaborator. In that we're not trying to add, we're just trying to keep it at a high level.
Right.
So if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of concept. But I think that clients now really, really want to break through, and they want to do something original and distinctive and culturally relevant, and people are going to Shazam the hell out of their commercial and stuff. They're really willing a lot of the time to take a chance on things. And we're often finding that people who are the creators, they want that chance too. So they're willing to kind of step into something on spec a lot more than they used to. So you're going to find people that are established that aren't willing really to do things on spec. They need a demo fee, they need some upfront money. And then you're going to find, kind of emerging talent, composers especially, producers, arrangers, that are really willing to take a shot with us on spec. And, I don't blame them. I had to do things on spec early on in my career.
Yeah, I think we all have, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me ask you, getting the right people to create music for your projects is a large part of your job, probably a huge part. What's the best way for someone, independent artist, publisher, label, or composers, to learn what your musical needs are and get on your radar?
That's a good question, because we don't always know what our musical needs are until sometimes the 11th hour. Right? Like 85 to 90% of the time, it's not, it's a situational thing. So it's tough. It's tough to give kind of like a scientific answer to that question.
Process when, like, let's say you get a brief from a company, or when you send out your briefs, I mean, do you have a network of people, like a trusted network of people that you go out to?
Yeah. It's interesting. And, I wonder what the guys and gals that I trained and mentored think of this. But we don't always send out briefs unless there was lyrical content that was really relevant to the cause, or if we were too busy to kind of come up with ideas on our own. What I believe is, if you're a music supervisor or a music producer in-house at an advertising agency, you should be able to, through your expertise, come up with great suggestions. So, if you need to send out for a brief where you just have a limited kind of, not a lot of people know about jazz or old R&B or soul or funk music or classical music. People, especially in their 20s, probably don't. But, I do. And there's no reason that I would need to reach out to some of these vintage labels or major labels for ideas. I should know these ideas. And I think that's part of the expertise and the value that you add as a music person. Again, there's going to be times when we're so freaking busy that we just don't have the time to do it, and we need people to send us stuff like in a few hours so we can get stuff together for a presentation. Or we have a very limited scope of expertise in a particular area. What I generally do in those cases is I have a couple of go-to people that might, suggest particular things to look into. So, to make a long answer shorter, don't send out a lot of briefs, interestingly. I know other people that do. I just don't. And a lot of the people on my team wouldn't either, unless usually if there was no kind of knowledge or there was no time.
Right. Well, I guess that's part of the job description of what you do, why they're hiring you is to bring that expertise to the table. So yeah, totally get that.
Yeah. Otherwise, you're a middleman or a middle woman or a middle person, right? Like, I don't mind being that middle person and being the executor, like I said before. Sometimes it's really fun, but I don't know. I feel like I'm too proud of my profession and being professional to do that sometimes. Like, if I have the time, I should be able to come up with a great idea, especially if someone trusts me on the executive creative level or, we're working with a major director or we are working with a client directly. Like, if they're going to trust me, I want to be able to give them the goods on my own.
Okay, that makes sense. Josh, I want to ask you a personal, professional question, which I always think is one that I always love to explore with people, which is, what have your biggest professional mistakes taught you?
That's a great question. My biggest professional mistakes have taught me certainly what never to do again. And the people that I've learned the most from are the assholes and how not to behave, how not to kind of treat other people or be abusive or be reckless or be too aggressive. So the mistakes that I've made over the years were things where I had complete ignorance and I had no idea about a certain thing, or I didn't understand the politics of what was going on with our client or internally. I was just really kind of like green when it came to that. So, when I would teach a lot of people on my team and mentor them, I would say, look, you got to go through a bunch of mistakes. You got to be in the trenches. You have to take some flack, and you're going to have to deal with kind of not such professional people and trying to interpret what they want, because then you'll learn how to deal with that the next time it happens. So I'd say I learned the most in my career from my mistakes, and the most in my career from the people that have been douchey, too aggressive, and really kind of just mean and disrespectful, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect
Absolutely.
sense.
Josh, for our audience, for someone who is interested in pursuing a career in music and advertising, such as yourself, what steps should they be taking?
Researching a lot, as much as you can, about the great work that happens out there. If you see something that really moves you, there's an amazing Super Bowl commercial. There's an amazing BMW execution online. There's an incredible placement. Research that, see who the players are, and then kind of follow what they've done, right? So in terms of kind of educating yourself on what's great and kind of understanding how it was executed, and then work on your network and try to learn who the players are at various places, how you could kind of connect with them in a meaningful, interesting way, which every person has a way of connecting with people. You just have to understand how to utilize that way of connecting in a great way. So yeah, it's essentially learning about the great people, understanding their process, understanding what great work is, understanding how to talk about it so people realize that you know what you're talking about, and then connect into the players that are doing it and the emerging players that are in the space. And there are so many conferences that happen now around the world that relate to this space that I've been in for all these years. When I first got into the business, man, there were hardly any. It was amazing. And now there are so many. And I've been to a lot of them. I love to speak publicly. And there just seem to be more and more. So go to conferences as well. And that's a great way to connect to these people because a lot of them are there.
Are there any books that you would recommend that artists or those wanting to pursue a career should be reading? Any that you've come across that are exceptional in your experience?
I haven't aligned too well with some of the books out there. There's a new book that Amanda wrote. She's a music supervisor out in LA. I think Amanda Thomas is her name.
Amanda
And,
Creed
uh,
Thomas,
Creed
yes.
Thomas,
Yeah,
we've
we've
had
had
her
her
on
on
the
the show, yeah.
Yeah, she's really cool, and I've met her, and she's really smart, but I haven't read her work. I know it came out recently, but just from knowing her, I would say that it's got to be a well-written, intelligent book because she's a very intelligent woman. I've seen excerpts in various people's theses, believe it or not. Um, I've been interviewed in some of them where people are writing papers on kind of how music and advertising and music and music supervision has permeated culture and stuff like that. It's pretty easy to research various papers that are put out there because they're online. But I haven't really aligned with any of the books and felt like they were kind of like the holy grail, uh, unfortunately.
Okay. All right, that's no problem. What are the most important pieces of advice that you can offer artists or bands or composers who are looking to have a successful career in advertising or in working in that space musically?
There are two ways of approaching it. Um, you could be mindful of the fact that if you write a song that kind of fits into the trope of anthemic tracks that build, that have a positive message, if you want to compose music and produce music like that, there's a higher percentage that you're going to be able to get your music licensed and synchronized in this space. The other thing, which is almost the antithesis to that suggestion, is that just do your thing. And if people really connect with it, they're going to want your music. These music supervisors are going to want your music because it's just great music and it wasn't created for anything else than being great music. You know what I mean? It's the purest attitude. There was no intent. A lot of the greatest uses of music ever in advertising were never ever intended for advertising, but they just happened. Some of the great original pieces that have been created for advertising were kind of like last minute throw-ins that were written for something else. The intent wasn't for the medium or the media that it was used in the end. So to me, it's like there are bands out there that are really great at creating music that's commercial, branded, friendly. And then there are people that just create this music that's just great music and people want it. So it's definitely, there's a duality to that.
Okay. Thank you so much, Josh, for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I hope this was helpful and very useful. The questions were excellent. Yeah, the questions were great.
Yeah,
and,
thanks so much. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure.
You know, I always love talking with Josh. He's so bright. He's so, such a master of that particular world. It's a world that's very, very different from other aspects of music supervision because it's always related to like something very situational, something very specific with like a brand. It's not even the thing of a TV show. It's one thing at a time,
Correct.
One brand, one commercial, one ad,
One piece of music to fit that ad perfectly.
Exactly. And, several things stood out to me in this interview, Eric. And one of the main ones was, in the past, it wasn't that long ago, maybe, 15, 20 years ago, the consciousness among artists in terms of using their music in advertisement and commercials was totally different
like
than it is today.
cardinal sin. Well,
exactly. And it was looked upon as selling out.
Right.
You didn't do that. You were less of an artist if you did that. Very few people. I mean, I can only think of maybe 2 artists in the world today that don't allow their music to be used in advertisements. Right. One is U2 and one is Neil Young.
Right.
Those are the only 2 that feel that way. And that's fine. They're entitled. But his answer was very interesting when we asked him about that question, if you recall. He talked about the economic factor.
Right, the shift in that.
Yes, how the shift occurred when the economics of music fell out.
Exactly, when we went from a copy model to the access model.
It completely went away. And, technology produced this kind of situation where you couldn't make the kind of money that you once did. So that was a big factor. But he talked about something else cultural, which I thought was interesting, and that was that brands became more relevant in culture.
Exactly.
And more towards, people's DNA. People grew up with, the idea of, music being something that would advertise products or advertise brands that were relevant to their life.
Right. And also, too, from the economic standpoint that we talked about, the artists, that they were getting paid a pretty sizable chunk of change up front for the placement of that song.
Absolutely,
so I thought that was really good. And I love the concept of what Josh has always talked about. I mean, even when we interviewed him on the Insider series, where he talked about, instead of selling out, I call it selling in, which I thought was a really great concept.
Yes, which is all, I think, part of that shift in consciousness that we were just speaking of. Absolutely right, yeah.
I thought also, too, when we asked him about the, in the attention economy, has this, kind of reinvented the way music has been used in media? I thought that it was very interesting to hear some of the thoughts that he had said on that, with, how difficult it is to pay attention. I guess to get people's attention, we keep talking about this being the ongoing theme in most of these episodes that we talk about, about how to get that attention. And then, talking about the concept of curation, how there's just, finding a reliable curator, that there's just so many of them out there that it's almost too much. And it's the whole idea of the infinite choices that we have of music, that it's just almost like it's just too much.
It is. And what I have found in that particular space, which I think that's a very astute comment that he was talking about, because one of the things that I find, I am in my world, one of the more well-read people, because of what I do and because of what we do and because I teach. And one of the things that I find is that even when you follow many, many, many so-called curators or news sources, it is even overwhelming in terms of the ones that you follow.
Right.
For instance, when IndieWire, which is one on film, tells you the 20 films you need to see this season, I'm thinking, like, you've got to be kidding. Like, who has time for 20?
Right.
Like, really? I'm going to find 20, and this is like one post, like 20 films. Or Pitchfork, the 7 albums, Eric, you need to hear this week. I don't have time for 7 songs,
much less 7 albums.
Where the fuck am I going to come up with time for 7 albums that I need to hear this week in the next 7 days? Yeah. This is part of the problem. Is
everybody's
much.
A curator, and even the good ones, it's overwhelming.
It's because what they're trying to recommend to you that you are following, is too much to absorb.
Right.
It's this like
it's like the influx of emails that we're getting. It's just like it's on and on. How much of this, even the ones that you are following, it's like it's almost like it's too much.
Absolutely. So, it's it's interesting you bring this up, because this is one of the reasons that I will not, under any circumstances, get any bills that I have to pay online. I will not get the bill sent to me. I'll pay the bill online, but I will not, because of that very problem. I got into terrible trouble with a company once, and it affected my credit, because in the tsunami of email, I missed that they sent me a statement via email, and I didn't pay the bill, and it affected my credit. So therefore, I'm going to assume that every single bill that I'm to get, I'm getting, and that no.
Right.
Absolutely not. And that's all part of that same process.
Yeah. And one of the other, topics we covered with, does online social media websites give you more, creative freedom in your musical choices? That isn't as big as a factor. And he was just interesting how he was talking about, the concept of how when they were advertising, back in previous times, like with broadcast, radio, and cinema, that they, weren't as big. And then he said that, the budgets have plummeted, and in terms of the relativeness of with social media, that he doesn't see big budgets, that they're like very, very small.
They're minuscule. I think it was the word he used, minuscule. And the thing about it, Eric, is that the budgets have plummeted on TV and on film, and on advertisements. Across
the board,
across the board. Things that used to get 6 figures, now you're lucky to get five figures
Right.
on the low end, like less than 50% of what you used to get.
Right.
Even for classic stuff. And that's part of that whole tsunami. That's part of, what I once got for this. Well, now, if you're not willing to do it, there's 30 people standing behind you that are willing to do it for this.
Right.
And that's part of the, whole economic shift in that. And I thought it was interesting that he brought that up because it's an economic model. You have online advertising now. You have companies making specific media, like in Josh's world, for the online community,
Exactly.
for social media, not for broadcast television,
Right.
that has a limit of 1 minute, 15 seconds, whatever it is. That can be 2-3 minutes.
Right.
But there's no money in doing it.
Exactly.
So it's a world that you have to sort of create over time. You have
Correct.
to get people to do it on spec or get people to do it for really, really cheap.
Right.
It's not like even like the video game world that expects you to create 4 hours of music for some of these video games, but they have unbelievable budgets
Right.
to get you to get an orchestra to do 4
Exactly.
hours of music.
Exactly.
And they have the money to pay for that.
Right.
Whereas this world like that he's talking about doesn't. And yet it's interesting because that's the new frontier.
Yep. And I think one of the final topics, one of the areas that, we had covered that I thought was interesting was, how does someone learn, what his musical needs and how to get on his radar. And it was just interesting how he said that, the whole concept of, we don't always know till the 11th hour, till the last moment, which is typical in our world, especially when it comes to film, television, and all that kind of thing, and that it's situational.
Yes, 85, I think he said 85 to 90% of that is situational, and that he doesn't always use a brief.
Correct.
He doesn't always send a brief out, which I thought was really, really important, which to me just goes to show that in this particular world, keeping your relationships open and in communication with these people is absolutely crucial.
Hey Insiders, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We really appreciate it. To get show notes, links, and everything that was mentioned during this interview, head on over to our official website at MUBUTV.com/podcast/show notes. If you're enjoying the content and what we're doing here on the show, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts from. And don't forget to rate and review our show over at iTunes. 5-star reviews are always welcome and help to ensure that our podcast stands out on the top rated and new and noteworthy charts on iTunes in our space. You can also find us on social media at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all ending with the handle MUBUTV, which is spelled MUBUTV. Don't forget to catch our flagship show, the MUBUTV Insider Video Series, airing every week on YouTube at youtube.com/MUBUTV. This show was produced and created by Rich Ezra and Eric Knight. This show would not be here if it weren't for our amazing team, which are the following: interview editors Sarah Nissenbaum and Alex Taylor, show notes and transcriptions by Jani Chang, Nicole Capodoglo, Lilia Owens, and Sarah Nissenbaum, theme music by Disciples of Babylon, and be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the MUBUTV Insider Podcast.